Well, hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the beautiful world you are. Welcome back to my channel. I'm Chantelle, your hostess, definitely with the mostest of everything. So, very happy to have you here with us today on our wonderful Double Trouble Wednesday with our gorgeous Jessie. But just before I bring Madam Lovely on, I am just going to make one or two announcements for the rest of the week. So today's Wednesday. So we have this show now, and then the Jessie show after this at 3:30 p.m. Central African time, 2 hours from now. And then, of course, tomorrow I don't have Dr. Dennis on, but I do have Samantha Plested, who is the transsexual woman I interviewed maybe a month ago now, who's going to be doing a Q&A with us. So any questions you have around that, any curiosities, any, I don't know, whatever it is, she's so willing and happy to answer all our questions. So join us for that. That'll be, I'm not sure if it's 6 or 7 p.m. tomorrow. It is on the schedule though, so just keep a check out for that. And then, of course, Friday morning, Friday noon, I'm on Rumble and X. We're not on YouTube with commentary on the greatest untold story ever of Adolf Hitler. We are on Rumble with that and X. So come and join Joanne and myself with that. Super fascinating, super eye-opening, and definitely gives us a heck of a lot to think about. And then on Friday at 5 p.m. Central African time, we're doing a closed meeting on Zoom with Mandy Vermaak, who's the LifeWave expert here in South Africa. That's the X39 patches. We're going to be talking about the product, the benefits of it. It really is amazing. The reason why we're doing it in a closed setting is because she's obviously not allowed to talk about certain things on air. So just in terms of LifeWave protocol, we can't really do it live, but happy to do a closed meeting where everything is explained, and also an opportunity for a business opportunity if you would be interested in hearing more about that. I will be posting, it'll be on Zoom, so I'll be posting the links on the different chat groups as well. So hang out with Shanti on Telegram as well as Aquarius Rising on all the platforms as well. So it'll be on a Zoom. We'll send the link. So please come and join us for that. Natural health, the way of the future. Anyway, I think that's all I have in terms of that. So without any further ado, ta-da,
Voila.
madame.
Yeah, you have a very
Please.
interesting lineup coming up.
Yes, we do indeed. And wow, what an interesting bunch of guests we're having on Ara as well recently.
Right.
Um, Beverly Rose, of course, from the ex-psychic to the ex-presidents of South Africa, spilling tea, man, like we haven't heard before. If you haven't caught our last show on Monday, yeah, that was on the one we spoke about Bird Island, which is South Africa's Epstein Island, where all our presidents and things were making, well, I wouldn't say presidents only, but definitely part of the dignitaries doing snuff movies and crap. I mean, heartbreaking. And then, of
Yeah.
course, Juliet Bryant from yesterday, who was the Epstein survivor. And isn't it interesting, Jessie, that suddenly there's no Epstein list, which means there can't be any Epstein survivors either, right? I mean, what a
Well,
load
I
of
think
hot
the survivors
news.
aren't going anywhere, you
That's
know.
what I'm saying.
I think people
They're
are
there.
fighting for their voices to be heard and will be heard, you know.
Yeah, I have no doubt about that. So yeah, we've got great things happening here and still
Yeah.
continuing to happen as well. And you, what's happening on your side?
Yeah, so much. This Thursday, I start the Unbelief workshop. So people can still register for that. It's this Thursday and next Thursday. evening from 7 to 10, but we're going to really tackle, belief in our faith and, you know, what are some of the conditions that hinder our belief? How can we have our belief? It's such um, a strength in our faith. How can we, you know, hone it, sharpen it, make it all that it can be because it is such a vital part of our faith. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then August 26th, from 9 a.m. to 11, I'll have my next International Crest Decode. So, we've done several of those with the Pope coat of arms, and we're starting to get into understanding how the system communicates, what's happening in the quadrants and who has authority. So I encourage people to sign up for that one. And then the next big one is going to be August 7th and 14th from 7 to 10 p.m. And that's the architecture and the altars. And learning that, we've talked about how the system, they put so much into the structure of the buildings to communicate, what's happening in that building. And we know that they place altars, underground or in certain buildings. Those are going to be places where they're going to engage in the temple, sexual sins, the sexual prostitution, the, raping, torturing of children. And yet that's also going to be the same place where they're going to sacrifice. So, can we know, more about that place just from the architecture of the buildings? So that's what we're going to start to get into, their line contracts that are in the architecture.
Wonderful. I mean, you definitely coming up with some super cool stuff at the moment as well. I mean, you always have, but I love these exposures of all of the stuff that we have not seen. That's literally, as we say, being hidden in plain sight. For me, that is super exciting and honestly a wonderful time to be alive. I mean, if we were alive at this time, and I know a lot of people have not had a pleasant experience in life, but if you're here and you're with us, God's given you a purpose.
Yeah.
That's just all I have to say. Jess, do you want to open for us in prayer before we hit it off with Madonna?
Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for all that you have made. We ask that you would bless our technology, our airwaves, and our equipment, as well as our conversation today and all those who are listening. In your name we ask, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Jessie. So we're going to be looking at Madonna. And I think that's so important because, what I obviously, with all the popes and the Catholic decodes and things we've been doing, especially recently, Madonna came out late 80s, early 90s. I'm not sure when she was hitting it big in America, but that I remember. I know usually these stars came out a little bit later in South Africa. It wasn't at exactly the same time you guys, they were stars first there. Then we kind of heard about them, yeah. But I remember one of her first songs. I think it was her first song, but I could be wrong. The hit song, Like a Virgin, right? And it's like, again, this innocent, like we were talking about the nuns last week, this innocent Catholic, nunnish, good girl demeanor. And, then suddenly the good girl gone bad. So to me, that has been decades of grooming with Madonna. If you just look at that, she made it fashionable for young girls to lose their virginity, go wild, especially if you were like from the Catholic background, because isn't it like Catholic girls have a reputation of being good girls kind of thing, right? So now you're turning them into these sexual vamps, whatever you want to call it, right? I just find that very interesting. And of course, with the whole Catholic thing at the moment as well. So yeah, I'd love to hear what you have to say about that today.
Yeah, and there's so much that you see. I don't think that wasn't her first. You had more of her album that displayed more of, it was kind of like a twist of the Catholicism, and her, looked like she was kind of struggling a lot to hold on to the sacred, the precious things in her faith, and yet there were these little things that would be put out in the videos that um you know like the clothing that she'd be wearing. It's like she'd be going into the church in a dress, but yet it's very punk style, where she's wearing tennis shoes and um all this jewelry that's more punk style. Um so there was kind of this starting to get a blend of the gothic punk style and you know her not quite fitting the mold, and so you had songs like a prayer and things like that. But we're going to start to get into it because really, at the end of the day, Madonna's, she was a high is a hierarchy children or child born into the system, born, bloodline families, um, chosen for a position in the system where her job is um, to be a grand dame, where she's managing the escorts in the system. Not just managing, I really feel there's a grooming in that, which is why we see her so influential in raising up other celebrities or stars. They kind of do their little stint with her, and that kind of gives them an in. But what it really is it just gives them, an in into what? Into higher circles, into, being escorts for higher circles in the system. Um, there's an element of sexual magic, which is a part of this. And, we have to keep that in mind, that it's not just about her expressions of her faith or her beliefs or her trying to, express herself as an artist. Um, there's a drawing and alluring that, you can see throughout the time, where literally towards these last years, they're outright doing performances that, have ritualistic elements that they're displaying right on stage. So, um, that's where that kind of all goes. But I want to start, I want to kind of go back and a little bit, and we're going to show a couple screens here that go back to um, last week. We did a show on the Order of the Nuns, and I encourage people to watch that because that really is, very influential in the hierarchy children that experience their training in connection to the Jesuit Catholic churches. And, you're going to have these nuns, these sisters. Their role is kind of to be that virtue squad. They're very influential, in particular, like the Catholic churches that also work in connection with where they have, a private school as well. That's where you're going to see a lot more of their influence. And Madonna was one of those. She was um, brought up through, that Jesuit Catholic department. I think she had a lot of cross connection between different schools. In that, you get this imagery of teen girls that, um, they're highly sexualized. They're trained to be highly sexualized from a very young age, yet they have that cover life, that they're good, that they're pure, that, they're going to be virgins until they get married. Um, but that's not the case. It's a world where there's a lot of behind the scenes grooming and, prostitution, escort services. Um, I've testified about some of this in some of my affidavits where, like how did that look? Um, one of the private schools that we would go to for certain things, um, some of the things that they would do, it's like, they would have a Friday usually where they were going to have all of the high donors and sponsors from the area come in, and they make it look like it's usually like their quarterly, let's say, they'll rotate through their different specialty society groups. So you have like your Lions Club, your um, Knights of Columbus, your Opus Day, some of those different groups. So you'll see that they'll even post, there's going to be a Lions Club meeting. Well, then, as they start to prepare for that, they'll have a spot where it's going to be. They actually will have the kids help get stuff ready. Like I remember they would get coolers out in the school, the Catholic school, they have coolers and they stack those coolers with beer. Then they're going to prepare a meal. It's not your typical meal, because at the end of the day, these people are cannibals. But usually they're going to be more clever because they don't want, this is not your big feast. So, they're not going to display what they're eating. Usually they're going to have a lot of like sausages or um, cured meats, things like that. But, then they're gonna gather and they're mostly, like one of the times I've talked about, they had, you know, all the old men are doing their meeting, then they're gonna help raise money for the school. That's literally how it's put. They have all these girls come who are gonna donate their time. They're all like, 8 to 10 years old, we'll say. And they'll do a buying auction, to vote on these girls. And then, you know, some of the things like where it would get worse was then the girls would have to go give the men who, you know, purchased their time hugs, things like that. Um, as it went on, I think, initially, like the first times they abuse the girls, it's done more in private, but then it gets to the point where it's not even done in private. They literally in their meetings are, you know, having sex with these girls. So, um, that's very much the world Madonna grew up in, where there's going to be a catering to the men, whether they're coming to the schools for their meetings, whether they're meeting in the lodges, whether it's um, daytime or evening, but a lot of it happens right during the daytime. Kids that are supposed to be in school, supposed to be learning, really are learning more witchcraft, Kabbalah magic, sex magic, and that's a big part of their day is the sexual things that happen. And, just looking at the things that she puts out, that's a huge part of that. And so go ahead to the first picture there. One of the things we brought out in the Order of the Nuns is how they'll use, different images. One of their images is the eight-pointed star, which can look like a nautical star. It also can look like, what we see in the middle there in the red. Um, and then it can also look more like a quilting square. But what it is it, will dictate the times, the seasons. It's a little bit easier to see in the nautical type star, but you have definitely like what looks like, your North Star, a straight line going down, then like a cross, you've got that middle line going straight across. So that represents certain rituals um, that are going to be attended, 4 times a year. Then you have the actual cross in the nautical star, which represents the other 4 major rituals that are kind of in the off seasons. Um, so, we're going to see some of this symbology, and I did a massive decode on this. It'll be 2 parts. The first part's already out on my website, kingdomlivingwithjessie.com, in the Unveiling the System series, and it's about the princes of Jerusalem, and that's where I get into the 8-pointed star and the rituals and what that can tell us. And we did a little bit of that too, talking about, how that symbology comes out in some of the uh, nun orders and their connections, and then that it represents which rituals they're declaring that they're going to host or make sure that they attend every year. So we see some of this symbology used in the covers in connection to the magazines, where Madonna's image is promoted, and we see a lot of Kabbalah symbology that means things in the system that's promoted with um, her image that they put out. So that's what we're going to kind of look at here. Go ahead to the next one. So this was from her Like a Prayer, which was one of part of her earlier works. Some of the things that people aren't going to necessarily catch, it's made to kind of look, where it's drawing people's attention. It's meant to kind of be more like the good girl, bad girl imagery, kind of giving that display of slight sexual images. Um, Behind this, what do you have? It's a lot more blatant than that. And to be honest, um, when we think of the sexual things that the grand dames are going to be doing and promoting, um, it's beyond subtlety. They're not just getting into the physical act of sexual pleasure. It's far beyond that, because there's that element of sexual magic. With sexual magic, you're going to have contracts with entities and spiritual beings. And we've talked about, you can look on the open scroll calendar, /satanic holidays, and you're going to see on there some terms. Satanic revels is their term for sexual orgies, but then you get demonic revels, and what is that? That's that's sex with demons. Um, so, you know, that's part of this, is that, they're not just training people to have sex with one another. There's that aspect of having sex with demons, having sex with those who are hosting high level principalities and demons for certain rituals, as well as you get into the bestiality. Um, so, everything at first seems kind of like her just unique style, but it's not. We notice in this one that, notice how you've got that kind of star image, but it's placed right at the navel with her name, and you have a O, like right where the navel's supposed to be from her name. Um, Madonna also being, interestingly enough, where does Madonna come from? That is another name given to Ashtaroth, representing the Mother Mary, which we know that, the imagery that comes down through the Catholic Church, it's not really Mary at all. They show, the image of the Madonna, and usually you'll see that um, that name purposely used. They'll use it with the Madonna and the Child, putting Jesus in the child or infant form, right? So think about this, like the first images of her, they've got this image and putting Madonna right at the navel, um, and that image of the mother and the child, right? But what is it, who is it really representing? You know, it's a way in the Kabbalah that, they have the geometrical proof. We've talked about this before, that they literally have the geometrical proof of who the Messiah is. They had the name, they knew the name of the Messiah well before he was ever born. They knew who it would be. They knew scripture said that that is the name above every other name. And, there's a headship, a governance that was placed on his shoulders. Yet, within the Catholic Church, why do they put Jesus in the infant form? It's because then his head, which is, his head, his name, which is supposed to be over every other name, is then placed into the arms of his mother, and whose name is elevated and raised up. It's the Madonna, Ashtaroth, the female goddess, okay? And if that was not enough, hidden in Kabbalah magic, not just Kabbalah, but let's just say we did a great series on, the Gnosticism in the Mormon temples and the connection in the system to Mormonism. And we talked about their special clothing and their holy underwear. And, within that holy underwear, they have symbols, one of those being at the navel. It's a line contract. Literally, they're using her name here, the Madonna, as a line contract at the navel, which is specific, in their Kabbalah stuff, connecting it not just to the Jesuit Catholic, but connecting it to that Mormon contract of, the place that's supposed to be holy, right? But what are they putting in that place of holiness? The name Madonna. And that's what they're also putting the crown on, the crown there at that navel. And, where does that go to then? Go ahead to the next one. Um, all of that, or yeah, I guess we'll go past one more. We'll come back to this one. So all of that, going back to one of the crests we spoke about, uh, in our show, The Order of the Nuns, with the Carmelite nuns. And, notice you've got a heart, you've got a flame put there, you've got the crown. Now, you also have the winding road, which we talked about. That winding road is a symbol that they'll use in Kabbalah magic. Um, but think about this, that, in that last image we saw, like here we see on the sides of the cross, we see the stars. You've got 3 of them, but 2 are on the sides. Um, think about this, like what they're literally displaying. Um, with that crown, with that starburst, um, which can replicate a flame. We know that there's a major chakra there at the navel too. And what do, they put there by having that heart there? Well, all of that goes back to your order of, um, Augustine, which, you know, we looked at certain symbology, like with the Pope. We talked about how often they'll show that heart with the flame and they'll have a book under it, that representing, your contracts under the Keys of Solomon and other books where they're going to be summoning spirits. So all of this symbology represents, who are they making the contracts with? Um, that crown at the navel and that heart at the navel representing Mary, which in essence is representing Ashtaroth, meaning that they're putting, you know, a contract at the navel with Ashtaroth. And you get the worship of the divine feminine in that, um, and the raising up of not only Ashtaroth, but also of Lilith. And if you, you know, if you look at their sigils, I didn't include them here today, but you have a sigil both for Lilith and for Ashtaroth. Both are going to be worshipped, and in their sigils, you get crosses put, like clubbed crosses put at a certain formation. And you'll see that that lines up with some of, you know, this imagery that we see with the stars and the heart there with the Carmelite nuns, um, going to, you know, really going back to, you know, what is the Sacred Heart and the flame, all of that represent? It represents their worship of Lilith and Ashtaroth and their contracts with, you know, coming under her headship. So, you know, early on, you know, there was imagery that Madonna began to display that really is displaying her Kabbalism and her studies in Kabbalism. You know, it's my full belief that she attempted to get out and, you know, they pulled her back in, um, you know, and then you see kind of a surrender to it, to the position, to her calling in this, and, you know, her doing her job. Um, but yeah, that we'll go ahead to the next one. So that's some of the initial imagery. Um, you know, in this, like this was some of the jewelry that we were talking about. You kind of get her being one of the first, you know, you start to see the, you know, girls usually had long hair, but you see the short hair, you see it not even, you know, what would be considered your typical styles then, you know, more spiked, more, um, you know, punky looking. And, you know, this image she starts to create for herself that is going to go beyond your average Catholicism. Um, you know, really it's a coming out and a coming into how she's going to begin to display herself. And that definitely, you know, with all her displays comes that array of her Kabbalahism and you know, her magical studies. Um, you know, some of her big things she did. This one was connected to her live to tell, um, and you know that came along with the like a prayer. This is the, you know, the track that I believe as she was doing this was during that time where she was really trying to get out. Um, and, you know, they threatened her that, you know, basically her choice was do her job or she wasn't going to live. And I think that that is what it came down to, you know. But I think there's
That's
more.
actually really sad.
I think she would have chosen, I believe she chose not to live. And,
Mm.
you know, I think there were suicide attempts. And you know, it's my full belief that they absolutely would not let her die. So I think there was no other way for her but to do it um, because they wouldn't even let her really choose to die. So um, you know, it's a
Oh.
difficult thing for hierarchy kids in the system to get out. The only way out is, you know, through the Lord Jesus Christ and miracles, you know. But I
What are,
think, you know, you see the videos for a lot of these songs, you'll see that struggle that she's going through.
what are bloodlines, Jess? I know you said in the beginning that she is from the bloodlines, but what are Madonna's bloodlines? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know specific ones, but yeah, I think, it's my full belief that she's bloodline.
Yeah, she would have to be, for them to make such a big fuss of her. And then, of course, I mean, I know we've often spoken about her shenanigans in Africa, and then not just her kids. She got two, I believe, of her biological children, but then
Yeah.
starting orphanages here in Malawi, and then involving the twins, those little
Hmm.
twin girls. They must be what, maybe 13 now. Horrible. I mean, she's already got them performing on stage. Anyway, should we go to the next one?
Yeah. Yeah. So with this one, you've got her Madam X imagery, which really got into the kind of the masochism and the sadism in sex. Nothing new. Like, this is the woman that, one of her exclusive videos she put out literally shows her, pleasing herself on stage in front of an audience, that went along with her, like a virgin, um, songs and then further ones. So, nothing is surprising with her, but there's subtlety in it. You know, Notice the cross that she's wearing. You get kind of an offshoot of what would be considered your Opus Dei cross, and then when you see like the four little crosses around, that usually represents your sovereign nights, which are going to be connected to your holy nights, your Knights of Kadash, your Knights of the Order of Jerusalem, your Knights of the Order of Solomon, which all of those are, usually assigned to a sovereign territory, which is either usually Washington, D.C., London, or the Vatican and the Holy See. Um, but it's like she's found a cross that kind of blends that imagery of all of those groups. And then, the X is something, and we've talked about the layers in reading their language, and those, like, as you're in the system, you understand and have knowledge that is relevant to your position. So if you're just coming in, you're just being recruited, you're going to see the same symbol as someone else who's higher up, but you're going to understand it differently. So, at its face front value, a lot of people would see this image, they're going to connect it to that sadism, sexual deviance and things like that. But there's so much more to it. You know, what does that X also represent? Well, we see that in some of your badges for certain night groups. You'll see that X in the badge for the Knights of the Thistle. You'll also see it in the sigil for Avedon, the spirit of Avedon, which in the end times in the book of Revelations, what is Avedon? He's also known as Apollyon. What is his job? It's to, he's given the keys of the abyss to open the abyss and let this end time army out, right? So that's part of what that represents. It can represent certain groups. Um, that she's catering to. It can represent sigils and certain principalities and authorities. But then you also have the X connecting, being one of the major symbols that was used in connection to certain uh, projects. You have Project Greek Island or Isles, which was known to be connected to the Greenbrier Hotel, the Greenbrier schools. That's one of the major places where you have an underground Nazi bunker where, our House and Congress and former presidents met regularly. You had, people like the Vanderbilts highly invested in that area, um, where they were operating, training priestesses. not just at the Greenbrier Hotel there, but at the school that they have not far from there. And then you've got the Trans Alchemy Insane Asylum that's connected to that. So is she telling us where and who is supposed to gather there just by simply wearing that X? Saying, hey, this is where the party's going to be. You know, that whole Greenbrier underneath there, it's massive. They've got a huge area where a stage and um, a place where whoever's leading the events, the knots giving the instructions, will speak from. But it's big enough, they have massive military trucks that they can have underground there and everything. It's a huge area. So, was that what she was communicating, was, where things were going to be and what kind of party? They're going to get together and they're going to get escort services while they make their Nazi plans underground. That's kind of what that says to me. But yeah, so within her position as a Grand Dame, her job is to provide the escort services, whether, and not everything is going to be your typical celebrity party. That's not all they do. These people at the end of the day are a foreign government and a foreign military. They're going to be not only training the hierarchy kids, but they're going to be executing plans, things that both prepare for the future that they're trying to create, as well as, preparing for actual events that they're going to be executing in order to gain more authority, more power, more control over the world. And are there escort services during those times? Oh, yeah. So yeah, so interesting things with her. Go ahead to the next one.
Well, I don't know about you, but all I can see is how her boobs are squashed right up to her chin, and I can't
The
imagine
corset
how
is a little
uncomfortable.
tight, Shanti.
I can't imagine how uncomfortable that must be. I mean, that's like, ouch. Okay.
It's all right.
Just
She
my
doesn't
comment
need
on
to
that.
breathe anyway. Her job's just to stand there and look pretty and not breathe. Anyway.
Like, ow, ow, take that thing off.
Right. So you see stuff, a lot of imagery. This one was interesting both because of, you see her name written on her forehead, but then you also have kind of this image with it below where it says finally enough love. And then you see that M with a cross through it, which that symbol you'll see a lot in connection to, Jesuit Catholic symbology. You'll see it in the crest, different coats of arms, different priests will have that in connection to their image. That M, any chevrons, it kind of, you'll see the M or the W used as chevrons. At one layer, they're going to represent spiritual contracts with, what they're going to consider the seraphim or the archangels. So that M is going to represent contracts under Michael. At another layer, that M or a W can represent sex magic. And you'll even see, like, one of the things that you would see, particularly in the Methodist, the Baptist churches, um, they would have big crosses that they would put at the altars, um, and they would drape, a mantle in that M shape from that cross. And that would be a sign to them, when they would have that there was going to be sexual things. that would be one of the ways they would slyly communicate, when things were. And usually you definitely would see that draping of the mantle over the cross on your major holidays like Easter, Christmas, um, which also go with their ritual times. So, we see this imagery in connection to things that in the system they mean something. And then you see, the her name written over her forehead there, again with that O being very distinctly, um, just a little bit lower than the pineal gland, um, or where the third eye would be. Um, all of that giving that image of the third eye being opened. Um, more than that, though, too, you have, out of the book Revelations, the passages about end times and how the six, the devil's number, the 666, will be written on the forehead of those who are servants of the Antichrist. Um, it's very specific in scripture that um, it's going to be like a tattoo, that literally it will be written on the forehead. And you have an imagery through the Catholic Church where they will take ashes and write with the ashes on the forehead, and do specific crosses. What's interesting is that, the way that the cross is done, you know, um, like you have that cross line, when it's done way up high, that represents their contracts with Samael. And then when it's done low, it represents their contracts with Asmodeus. So, with her name written where it is, it would be reminiscent of, you know, that contract with Asmodeus, or also called Asmodai. Um, so, that's getting then into your higher levels um, of Kabbalah magic in the in the Golden Dawn. Um, there's a book that they will particularly have higher level members work through called The Red Dragon. In that book, it's a series of contracts. It takes time for people to work through that, because there's certain things that they have to do. There's a blend of cleansing, fasting, preparing the body. In that, they're not just making the contract, to summon the spirits. So they're not just learning how to summon these high level principalities and their commanders. Um, Many times they're literally physically preparing their body to become the host for these spirits. And so when you go through that succession, you get, certain spirits like Beelzebub, um, and you go through until, the second to last is Asmodai. And then the very last contract in that book is with Lucifer. So it's how they prepare those who are going to be hosts. And once you've gone through as far as you've gone, those are the spirits you've contracted with to be their hosts for the night. So, um, you know, in her grand dame position, she's not just, um, catering sexually, but literally there's a point where they offer their entire body to these entities for the evening. That's a whole nother aspect of this. So I believe
When you
that's kind of
say
what she's displaying in this.
you say she's a grand dame. Now, when we look at just the way you've kind of explained the system to us, you get obviously the mothers of darkness, and then they're divided into the different quadrants. In the quadrant that she would be in, where does a grand dame sit in the hierarchy?
They're gonna be on the side because their position isn't like, when you're looking at the Mothers of Darkness, you're looking at the governance of the system. Her position isn't connected to the governance. It's just connected to, you know, the rituals, the ceremonies, and providing the entertainment for the evening during those times. So, it's kind of like a side position. She, would be at the beck and call of she could be at the beck and call of the mothers. She could be at the beck and call of councilmen, any high level elites. She's in the upper circles, um, and, could cater to the grand high priest or priestesses, and, be like, you'll see him work in connection where, um, areas where she's going into, usually there's going to be alliances, people that she's connecting to in that. Um, so they'll purposely plan her tours and things to be so that she's in certain areas, making connections with certain people for based on what they're doing. Like, you had I forget if it was now the Grammys or the Oscars, but you had where Sam Smith had come out, with his one song Unholy, and, she was the main person sponsoring him. Um, and I, talked about how that was really, Sam Smith coming out in the running for a grand high priest position for the South, and she was the individual sponsoring that. And you see this whole display of him in that, and you see her coming alongside of which, it's about, that she's going to invest in that. I think, there's a lot more to that story, but when you get into, um, why is she coming out in that, it's because, she's offering not only herself, but every single escort that's underneath her to the beck and call of this man if he gets into that position as Grand High Priest, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. It's so slick. I mean, I just can't get over the slickness with which the system has organized itself so that it runs like a smooth machine.
Yeah.
And it has for years, decades.
Yeah.
Wild.
Generations.
Mm.
So here's another one. We see that M, um, but the way it's done, um, you know, you almost get behind the scene that compass, that male compass, but I think it's meant to look um, like a blend where you're seeing like kind of slight Masonic Kabbalah images. Um, you know, kind of in the very back, it looks like that crescent, but also then it's meant to look like legs. You see what the imagery of the crest there, and we even see like the banner, right? Like is typical for crest, that ribbon that goes across on the bottom. But look at where the ribbon end up. It's made to look like those ribbon ends are, you know, women's sexual attire. And yet they have the
Mm.
word immaculate
Mm.
highlighted, which is connected to
Mm.
what? The Virgin Mary, right?
Mary,
The
exactly.
Immaculate Conception. Um, so, and then you see the big M, which again is that connecting to your order of Milos, is that connecting to certain knights, certain priests who are going to be serviced. What is the Immaculate Conception in sexual terms? I'm not going to get into that, but look at even again Madonna, where she has it placed. You have that O again being where kind of that navel is going to be, but also where the womb. Um, And you
Right.
see almost like an apron at the bottom, which is again, what do men wear over um, your Masonic men wear an apron over that part where their seed is. Yet here, it's not your typical, you would see kind of like that top part of an envelope, like we see here, um, for the Masonic apron, but then you would see a square under there. Well, instead, they left that out and it's made very much to look like female underwear. Um, so you're like, okay, what is she all signifying, you know? And here's the interesting thing, the last interesting thing with this, the crest is meant to also kind of display an image of the capstone. And you know, in their Masonic things, you'll see like a doorway, an archway, and you'll have that capstone at the top representing the way of ascension. Um, and so she's kind of got this image. You've got a doorway, you've got the way to ascension, um, but you've got some mixed up imagery as to how that ascension's going to happen. Um, and there's a lot put into this when you really read it, um, that, a lot of that sexual imagery, which connects to your incubus and your subcubus spirits. Ashtaroth is, what's behind that. You don't just have one entity, you have an entity that is going to be controlling other entities, that is going to be gaining control of people through these incubus and subcubus spirits.
Wow. And you can just see that in everything that she displays about herself. It's all sex, all of
Yeah.
it. There's not even anything subtle about Madonna. It's all about that sexual
Well,
seduction.
the sex magic in the Kabbalah,
Mm, right.
it's all
Hmm.
there, all the hidden imagery of the Kabbalah in everything that she puts out.
I shudder to think what happened to her when she was a child. Couldn't have been fun.
Yeah. So, as she went on, you see a lot more of the ritualistic attire coming out, that you would see in the higher levels of the system. Um, for your major rituals, um, you're going to have, um, your individuals will dress up. Uh, Usually they're going to have robes that are black, or um, your high priestesses would wear red, but your upper level members usually are in black or white. And then you're going to have, um, most rituals, like your mothers of darkness, would always have a veil over their head so their face is not seen, but it was common for them to wear veils and then to also have these headdresses. Your grand high priestesses would wear the kind of sunburst headdresses like that. Um, so that's a common look for your grand high priestesses. Your grand dame could be in a headdress like that. You'd also see your mother goddesses who oversee the covens. They'll have dresses that they wear as well. Um, the headdresses are going to be homages to the different deities that they're serving. So the sunburst one like this is commonly worn in honor of Ashtaroth. And it can look different, but
Mm.
it'll have that kind of half sun shape look. Um, so we see her just continuing to display her contract with Ashtaroth. in different ways, and connection to her, her upper level Kabbalah. And then go ahead to the next one there. So this is, so as she's got further, you have some of her latest tours, like the Celebration tour, um, which got really interesting. And she had, you know, kind of what came out before as she was doing the tour were um, the magazine pictures or images of her not only being dressed like the Immaculate Mother, but um, like Mary with her Sacred Heart, but also, showed images of her, in the what became the famous picture of the Last Supper. Um, but you see like the female in the place of Christ, and this was one of the images too, where you see the Holy Bible, and you've got, her with her rosary, and you see a cross on the Bible. But what's interesting is the way she's placed her rosary, like that winding road in Kabbalah, and you have the cross up at the top, making it in a downward position. Um,
Mm.
and you see that cross line up high, which we talked about, that represents that contract with Asmodai. Um, you know, so there's just some interesting imagery here, and that we're catching. Go ahead to the next one. So, her Celebration tour, um, you see the Vanity Fair. This was her image at the Last Supper, which is specific to a couple things. So notice in that red gown, notice the rosary and how it's literally got these these very distinct points, and that it goes back to your seven sufferings and your golden prayer. The golden prayer is, focuses on the seven sufferings of Mary and the seven sufferings of Christ. That connects to the image we see here, where she's dressed as Mary with the heart, with the crown and the flame on top, and the seven daggers through it, representing the seven sufferings of Christ. But I've talked about how that imagery, they literally use this, because you're going to have your grand high priests and priestesses, when they are making their declarations, they're going to go through tests depending on how they're declaring themselves. Everybody in the system declares themselves based on their magical abilities, and whether they're going to walk down the left hand path, which is dark magic, or whether they're going to walk down the light side path, which is your white magic, or if they're going to kind of be a blend of both. um, they're kind of promoting their magical skills and abilities, um, and in that, if they're going through dark sides, all of their tests and everything are going to be connected to blasphemies, um, and you're going to get more evil, versus um, your sufferings are going to be connected to light side declarations, and it's just it's all evil. At the end of the day, it's all evil, but just the objectives are kind of a little different. Um, I've talked about the Grand High Priest rituals that I witnessed, and um, literally they go through the seven sufferings of Christ, the last of that being that they're crucified, and part of that test is they have to raise themselves from the dead. So that's how they get into that position, is literally they raise themselves from the dead. That's one of the ways they're going to display their magic. So you get a blend of things that are meant to look good, that's how they're, they're going to display it through a form of godliness. But the truth is that, really they're just engaging in evil, and all of these images that they get us to believe are sacred or represent sacred things are really connected to how they communicate unholy things. So,
Wow.
that's about it. And I missed the question. I wasn't able to read while I was talking on that.
No worries. Veronica Lodge actually had a very interesting question, which I was also thinking. A lot of, not just with her, but with some of these other people as well, they're always looking up like that. Why do they look up? It's like roll their eyes up. It's not like that, but it's more like rolling the eyes up. Any particular, it's like, if I
I
can
think
bring up that one
you'll have
picture.
the trances, you'll have, when they host other the spirits, they're in a trance-like state. But
Right.
it can also be used to represent ascension, that they're above, that they're
Mm.
in the spirit world. You get the trance image connected to like the meditation, that they're meditating on something higher. Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah. It was because it's, that lift your eyes to the Lord or lift your eyes to Jesus. So often you hear that in setting Christian ceremonies and stuff, prayers. But it's, again, I can
Yeah,
only
but who are
assume
they
that
looking
must be
up
a
to? They're
mockery.
looking up to
That's what I'm
Ashtaroth or
saying.
something else,
It's a
It's them
mockery.
raising themselves as God. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's the levels of to which the mockery extends to me is also just on, really, it's on another level.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can tell, with Madonna, that whole Catholic theme throughout, and still to this day, right? To this day.
Right.
What is your take on Lourdes? I think that's how you pronounce the name, Lourdes, or Lourdes, her daughter. I mean,
I
that poor
don't really
child to
keep up a
me.
lot with that, but you know, um, I think Lourdes is actually connected to because you'll see some of the Catholic churches with those names, and I believe all of that is connected to milk contracts.
Oh no.
So interesting, huh? Is that why the child has her name? Is she Madonna's milk contract with Ashtaroth? You know,
Wow.
or the holder of all the milk contracts, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Wow. Thank you, Jessie. That was super informative. Definitely one I'm going to watch again. It's so interesting, because Madonna was an icon in my teenage years, growing up and
Hmm.
what have you. And it's so fascinating because, yeah, this wild girl just appeared on the scene and kind of on so many levels gave conservative girls permission to be naughty, right?
Right.
But we can see where that is actually coming from and where it's actually led to. It's crazy. Wow.
Yeah.
But anyway.
Let me bring out one more quick thing about Lourdes too.
Mm.
That also can be connected to your high places, and contracts with the high places. So, um, I would propose that, there's things with the milk contracts and the high places that are connected to all of that. But
Very interesting. Wow. Okay, guys and girls, for those of you who don't have Jess's information website, well, there it is on the bottom of the screen. And wow, super informative, Jessie. Thank you so much. And thank you,
thank you.
everybody, for joining us. Anything you just want to wrap up with and
No, I think
before
that's
you end
it,
off for
and
us
we'll
in
just
prayer?
plan I'll pray and we'll plan to see everybody in just a little bit here. But Lord, we thank you for all that you are doing. We acknowledge that you are the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Lord, we thank you that we can learn how to read this hidden language, that we can understand throughout the time what they have been communicating to one another. Father, we ask for all the children who are coming after and those who are here now, Lord, that you would deliver them with such a great deliverance out of the bondage, out of the wickedness that these evil people have put into place. We ask that as we reveal more and more, Lord, that that you would deliver us out of that bondage and wickedness, that you would break the chains of wickedness and remove the yokes of oppression from upon us. We ask this in your powerful name, Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I so appreciate you joining us again today. And we will see you back in around about 45 minutes, back on Arrow, Aquarius Rising Africa. And we're going to be talking about poltergeists and hauntings and creepy creatures of the night things. Don't bring your kids along. Jessie's going to be telling us ghost stories.
Just a few.
Just a few, yeah. Tandeka Gumedi. So nice to have an African on the show. Yeah, boy, yes. I think you must be the first one. Welcome. Okay, guys and girls, awesome to see you. I'll see you back in 45 minutes. Take good care. Until then, no, don't be good. Just don't. Just have fun. Be happy. Goodbye.